What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, September 6th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. Okay, keeping an eye on the weather because it's getting a little, it's an interesting hurricane season. There's no doubt about it. Hurricane Florence, they were kind of hoping that it was going to swing to the north. It has not done so, and now it looks like it's going to impact somewhere along the eastern seaboard, somewhere between Georgia, Carolinas, Virginia, could even hit Washington, D.C., and depending upon the strength of the storm, that could be a problem because don't forget that Washington Monument was weakened by that fracking-induced earthquake a while back. So we want to keep an eye on that. So you've got about a week to get prepped, and don't wait until the last minute. Now, out here in Hawaii, Hurricane Norman, as expected, turned north last night. We're on the very outer edge of the storm system. We're getting a little bit of wind from it and not much else. But Hurricane Olivia, which was expected to turn north, has not. The storm track is now leveled off. It's headed west right at us. It should be here about this time next week, at which point they're predicting it will have weakened to being a mere tropical storm, but that's still going to be kind of intense. That's leading to some confusion here because you're not going to believe right after Hurricane Lame, especially here on Oahu, where we didn't really suffer all that much damage from it, everybody took all the stuff that they had bought up, the bottled water and the ropes and the batteries and everything, and they tried to take it back to the store for a refund, which led to a little bit of friction, especially in those stores where there had been some price gouging going on. And so now they're having to rush back to the store and say, I changed my mind. I want the bottled water back and the batteries and everything. You got to keep this stuff on hand all the time. You don't know what's going on. We have yet another tropical system forming up in the eastern Pacific off the coast of Mexico, and there are two more tropical systems forming up in the eastern Atlantic off the coast of Africa. So until it's all over, you should be prepped. Being prepped is a good thing. It's a survival skill. All right, well, now that I've proselytized about the weather long enough, let's take a phone call. We're going to go to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jim, are you there?
Michael?
Yes, you're on the air.
Hello? Okay. Did you, by any chance, read the New York Times op-ed column today regarding the person who won't give their name, stating that the White House has been taken over?
Not necessarily taken over. What he's basically claiming, whoever this is that there is an anti-Trump resistance within the White House that is basically keeping the president from doing what he wants to do, which is something a lot of people have been suspecting all along. And apparently two more people have now come forward through another newspaper saying, yes, there's dozens and dozens of us. And it's a very alarming situation. Personally, if I were Trump, I would say this justifies firing the entire White House staff and starting all over again with people from outside the Beltway. Or there's another way to look at this. This could be a very clever psyop against Trump himself. That the Times could have just made this up out of thin air to get the White House staff distrusting each other, suspicious of each other, not sure who they can talk to anymore, to basically paralyze the White House in terms of its ability to function. And given the timing coincident with the Woodward book, which I don't think is a coincidence, I'm starting to think this is an attempt to simply, psych out Trump and the White House staff.
Well, I get the impression after reading it that it sounds like a coup or a coup in the making.
Well, I guess you could use that word, although coups d'etats are usually from outside, not from within. I think probably subversion would be a more appropriate word in this case.
Okay, I understand that, but it's really alarming. It just seems like the government is out of control. And maybe even Trump might be out of control.
If it's true, it betrays a White House in chaos. Trump is not in control of his own administration, if true. We don't know that it's true. I'm having my doubts. I know there's a lot of tension inside the White House. There's no question about that. But between Woodward's book, which is already being denounced by a lot of the people whose names appear in it, and all of a sudden we have this very strange op-ed, I think they're trying to fake Trump out. I think they're trying to get the White House staff just in a state of confusion and paranoia so that they become less effective than they are already. So we do have to ask, we don't know if this is really what's going on or if it is a psych op.
Well, tell me this, though. Do you think Trump really has any strong allies that he can depend on?
He has unfortunately surrounded himself with a lot of very bad advisors, and I've said it time and time again. His biggest single mistake coming into the White House is he wanted to be magnanimous in victory and allow the Obama holdovers to stay, thinking that now that he was the boss, they would be loyal to him, which is how it generally works in the world of business. But that's not how it works in politics, and it was a huge, huge mistake, and they have learned how to manipulate him. He's apparently very subject to flattery, and they basically loaded up his White House with a bunch of deep state operatives, and they've got him corralled. To me, it's been very obvious they are controlling Trump, but whether it's as widespread as this op-ed suggests remains to be seen. Now, Trump obviously is furious. He's demanding the New York Times release the name of whoever it was who penned the op-ed. Suspicion was briefly pointed at Mike Pence because the word lodestone appears in the op-ed, which is a word that Mike Pence is known to use. Now, that's not a compelling case. I use the word lodestone myself because I like being gratuitously verbose and obfuscatory. So, again, I'm not sure that this is the genuine article. And I think it's part of the way of putting psychological pressure on Trump as part of the overall plan to get him out of that White House before he really wakes up and realizes what he's got to do.
Right. Okay, Michael, I'm going to let you go. You take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. Okay, so getting on into the war zones, there's a lot going on. It's amazing how much of this stuff is simply not being covered on the corporate media. Even when they go to a recess on the Kavanaugh hearings, they go to some other banal stuff, and they're just not talking about how close we are to full-on outright war all over the Middle East, if not the globe itself. Now, Russian warplanes are continuing to attack in Idlib. They destroyed the factory where the U.S.-backed terrorists have been assembling their unmanned aerial vehicles that they have been launching into the areas of Syria under the Syrian government's control. And apparently they just took it down. And they're saying they're being very careful to only hit military targets in Idlib. Of course, the U.S. and Europe are out there saying, oh, my goodness, Russia just blew up 512 hospitals and orphanages. What will we do? What will we do? And so it remains to be seen what they're going to do. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But first, I want to take a phone call. Aloha. Welcome to the show, Steve Elkins. And what's on your mind?
The connection what Robert Mueller has in mind with Jerome Corsi. I'm trying to figure that one out. Any ideas what he's up to?
I think he's looking for anything that can be construed to prove that Roger Stone knew of this Trump Tower Russian meeting earlier than reported. And then he's going to use that to pressure Roger Stone to try and flip on Donald Trump. It's flimsy. And it really indicates a degree of desperation on the cusp of madness. But that's what Mueller is trying to do. He's trying to find anybody that he can get to flip on Donald Trump to come up with something that can lead to a case for impeachment, which, if the Democrats retake Congress, that's going to happen.
So after the midterms, you theorize that Donald Trump will fire Jeff Sessions or not?
after the midterms, I think if the Democrats do take the Congress, Trump is going to have a lot more things on his hands to worry about than Sessions, because by then it'll be a done deal. He needs to fire Sessions now. He needed to fire Sessions months ago. And I'm hoping that this betrayal from within his own White House staff, if it's real, if it's not a psychological operation, if it's real, it represents a professional betrayal. And I think Trump ought to wake up and say, all right, that's it. We're doing a complete clean out of the White House staff. We're going to get a bunch of people in here who work for Donald Trump and the administration, not for various and sundry special interests spread halfway over the globe. And he really needs to do that. If there was ever a time that he needs to put on those presidential brass knuckles, it is right now, this second. And I hope that somebody from the White House is monitoring this show and they're taking note of this. Because, again, Trump has been a tremendous disappointment to me, and I worked very hard in 2016 to put him in the office. But he is the president, okay? And I reject these underhanded, nefarious means to reverse the 2016 election. And it's got nothing to do with whether I like Trump or not. It has to do with the rule of law in this country. He is the president. And everybody working in that White House ought to be supporting him. It is very unprofessional. If this op-ed is real, it is incredibly unprofessional, not to mention childish.
Yeah, I agree. But, he has every reason to fire him right now, just on the refusal to investigate Hillary Clinton on destroying all those emails when she was told not to. She did destroy the emails. I mean, he has every reason to say, why didn't you investigate? You're not going to. Therefore, you're not doing your job. You're out of here. I don't know why he's waiting so long either. I would love to see it happen right now.
I don't know either. Maybe he's been told that presidents who stand up to the deep state get killed, like Kennedy, and presidents who refuse to go along with the war agenda get kicked out of office, like Nixon. And maybe Trump has just decided he doesn't have that kind of courage. Okay, but if I were sitting in that Oval Office, seeing what I was seeing between Woodward's book, supposedly full of all kinds of things that were leaked out of the White House, and now these op-eds, I would basically flash back to The Apprentice and say, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. Let's get some resumes in here from people who are not even in the District of Columbia. In fact, not even in the state of Virginia or Maryland. Let's get some people from the heartland of America who really know what's gone wrong with this country.
No, I agree, 100%. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what's going on here. But, yeah, he's got every reason to fire Sessions right now, and he should. Well, we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, I mean, Sessions has another reason to investigate Hillary Clinton now that it's come on out that China was the one who actually succeeded in hacking her private email server, and that it may have led to the discovery and execution of U.S. agents operating inside of China. And nobody's looking at that. Department of Justice isn't looking at it. FBI, which is supposed to be the counter-espionage people, they're not looking at it. CIA, whose agents were probably the victims of all of this, they're not looking at it. NSA isn't looking at it. Just everybody's obsessed with getting Trump, getting Trump, getting Trump.
Yeah, okay. Excellent point. Yeah, I agree 100%. Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks an awful lot. Oh, and by the way, if somebody is monitoring this show for the benefit of the White House, I'm still willing to be the NASA administrator as long as you agree that it's okay that my first order is that all the ground crews dress up like apes every time a spacecraft comes back to Earth. That's the one requirement I have for accepting the job. Claire's laughing in the other room. Okay, getting on back to the situation in Syria. Trump is out there warning Syria not to recklessly attack Idlib province. And he's out there trying to couch this, in this humanitarian disaster that would take place if you go on in and try and get the last of these terrorists out there. It would be a humanitarian disaster. I wonder where Trump's concern for killing civilians was when U.S. strikes pounded Raqqa into rubble a year ago, causing thousands of civilian deaths. And by the way, did you notice it was a year ago that Trump was saying Idlib was the haven for Al-Qaeda, their largest, most powerful haven since 9/11, and now he's trying very hard to save them. Turkey's trying to get the jihadists out of Syria. They're saying the Idlib operation would be a big risk. Well, any war operation is a big risk, especially when you're risking going up against Russia and Syria. So, now according to Russia, Israel's recent airstrikes and missile strikes on Syria were done at the request of the United States, which is trying to bring pressure to bear on Syria, but without being all that obvious about it. And it looks to me like they're going to go back to that old standby, the Assad using chemical weapons on his own people, blah, blah, blah. If at first you don't succeed, lie again, and the third time will be a charm. And Nikki Haley came on out with a comment saying that if there is a future chemical weapons attack, she knows who's going to be behind it. It will be Assad. And people are already ridiculing her. Over at LouRockwell.com, they're describing her as the psychic. She has a crystal ball. Maybe she inherited it from Miss Cleo. And she's looking into her crystal ball. The clairvoyant prognosticator of the transmundane, Nikki Haley, foresees that if there's a chemical attack, it will be by Assad. And again, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive for Assad to do something like that. He's all but won the war. He doesn't need to use chemical weapons. He knows that the use of chemical weapons would justify the U.S. coming back on in with a full-on military assault. He's not going to give the U.S. that red carpet. And if Assad were really dumb enough to use chemical weapons, why are they always being used against children and civilians instead of the jihadis? The story makes no sense at all. It never really did. Even Russia Today was out there poking fun at Nikki Haley. She's the psychic. She knows exactly who's going to use chemical weapons in Syria's Idlib. Come on, Russia Today. Haley is not psychic. She's just seen the pay stubs. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Mattis is out there saying the Pentagon has zero intelligence on Syrian militants' chemical weapons capability. And so Mattis is out there saying, despite having a fairly good penetration of the Syrian opposition groups, the U.S. has not seen any evidence suggesting that the militants in Idlib are capable of staging a chemical attack. Really, the only people who have these chemicals is the evil Bashar al-Assad. And from the degree to which Mattis and Haley are trying to shore up this sagging chemical attack narrative, it looks like the U.S. is actually going to go ahead, bunch a gas of innocent non-combatant civilians, blame Assad, and launch a major war into Syria, risking direct conflict with Russia. And as I said the other day, my concern is how quickly this could all spin out of control given the speed with which these modern computerized weapons operate. Something really bad and irreversible could happen before humans could intervene. And again, the examples I like to use are the shoot down of the Iranian passenger jet by the USS Vincennes, whose onboard computers made a mistake. They thought it was an F-14, and they killed it before anybody could yank the key out. And I think that's exactly what happened with TWA 800. The automated system made a mistake, locked onto the wrong target, and blew it out of the sky before anybody could intervene. The same thing could happen here. This is insanely, insanely dangerous. Meanwhile, and coincidental with all of this buildup in Syria, Britain is pounding on the Skripal case again. They're upping the ante, as it were. And Moscow saying it's just another cocktail of lies timed with an Idlib false flag operation. The thinking is that if we all believe that Moscow killed Sergei Skripal or poisoned him, we won't believe Moscow when they say that the chemical weapon attack in Syria is a false flag. Well, we don't need Moscow to tell us that. I've already explained the logic behind that. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back with a phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we got some callers waiting on the line. So let's start with Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I had this morning. I was listening to Real News for a while with David Knight, and he was going over, the suspects who wrote that memo or whatever it is that came out of the White House, and he comes to the conclusion, and I kind of think he's got a good source, and it's Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley has been, was a never Trumper before. She is very much anti-Russian, anti-Assad. She's a wall hawk, and she's been pretty much within the White House structure since Trump took office, and she's and a lot of the stuff that came out in that memo evidently was in not memo that whatever it's called. Anyway, that a lot of that stuff basically pretty much quotes her. So I think, but my own opinion is this: I think she might have been behind it, but I think Pence might be controlling this whole thing. I think Pence is a dirtbag. I think he's a dirtbag from the get-go, and I believe he's the one who really stabbed Mike Flynn in the back. Remember, he's the one who said Mike Flynn lied to him, whatever it's supposed to be. Trump should have gotten control when he first took office.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Nobody should have touched Flynn. He should have been directly working with Trump, exposing the deep state, exposing the weapons being given to jihadists by the CIA, along with the CIA. This is what Flynn knew where all the bodies were buried, and he should have been given carte blanche to work with Trump in getting the perpetrators to trial. They should have been arrested. Even if that had to go right up to Obama, or even further than that, even if it had to go to W. Bush or somebody like that. And Mrs. Flick, Hillary, the whole bunch. Flynn knew where the bodies were buried.
Mark, unfortunately, what we're seeing here, and I think what Trump is having to deal with confirms it, is that the U.S. government has become too corrupt to ever correct itself from within. It will never allow reformation from within. It's going to have to be allowed to collapse, and then we're just going to have to start over from scratch, start with the Constitution, the first 13 amendments, and build up from there, and make sure that we build into that new Constitution absolute rock-hard safeguards against the kind of things that allowed our government to be hijacked by big money interests. So instead of just having ordinary laws on campaign donation limits, they should be hard-coded right into the Constitution itself. Just common sense things like that. Let's learn from the mistakes the Founding Fathers made by their omissions. But again, it was 270 years ago. They reasonably could not foresee just how powerful corporations were going to become and how powerful their influence would be. So it is time for an updated Constitution, but it has to be written by we the people, not the professional politicians.
Well, I agree with you for the most part, but I do believe something could be done, but you need a very strong, gutsy president to do it. Now, what Trump could and should do, I doubt he will do it, is declare some kind of modified martial law. In other words, not complete martial law over the country, but over the capital district, over the capital, and he should over federal agencies, and he should use federal troops, not police, not agents, but actual federal troops loyal to him, to raid the FBI, CIA, Justice Department, IRS, and whatever else needs raiding. Seize every computer and every record they have. Start firing these people.
Mark, there's only one. There are two problems with that. There are two problems with that. First of all, posse comitatus. Technically, he could use the Marines because they're exempt from posse comitatus. But the other issue is, Trump can't just do that himself. He would need the cooperation of the top leadership of the military, and he doesn't have that. They want more wars, and they're not going to go along with upsetting a system which right now is just feeding them trillions of dollars to play with.
Some of the military, I believe, are behind him. If you remember when Obama was in there, when they were going to bomb Assad the first time, when it's so-called chemical weapons, the troops started rebelling, and even the generals, some of the generals, including, by the way, Flynn at the time, told Obama, "Don't do it. We're not sure if they were afraid even at that point of a possible military coup, or at least military refusing to go along with these orders. So I think you do have some generals that are loyal. He's got to know who they are, and if they're not generals, he can promote colonels. He could promote anybody he wants in the military. He could promote a sergeant major or a first sergeant to or a master sergeant to general if he wants to.
As commander-in-chief, he does have the authority to start firing the generals. He really could do it. But that basically could lead to a situation where all of the generals and military forces who are not supporting him would fight back, and then you've got a civil war in the streets of America, which is something I'm really opposed to. It's bad for tourism, and it's really rough on the landscaping. Mark, I got to let you go. We got to take another break. All right, I'll hold you over for one more thing, but keep it short. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're still talking with Mark in North Carolina, and you had one more thing you wanted to bring up.
I just wanted to say, Mike, that as far as I'm concerned, I think most people are concerned, a civil war would be far better than having a nuclear war. A civil war would be won very quickly, I believe, by patriots, because they haven't been in the military. The majority of the military would support the president. Maybe not the top generals, but that doesn't matter. The general is basically mostly incompetent anyway. Most generals don't get ahead because they're good. They get ahead because they got their heads where.
Yeah.
Most, not all. And I believe patriots in this country would end a war like that very quickly, including the armed citizens. The Second Amendment would come into being. I don't think these deep staters would last very long. And it's certainly better, like I said, I don't want to see it happen, but it's certainly better than having a nuclear war.
Well, the best option of all, the best option of all, the one with the least bloodshed, is a collapse of the U.S. economy and a collapse of the U.S. federal government, which I think is coming. I'm seeing all the symptoms of a Soviet Union-style collapse of this central government, and because I do not want to see bloodshed in the streets of America, or for that matter, anywhere else, I continue to counsel patience. And I know a lot of people are angry. I hear that anger building every single day. I see it in the emails. I hear it in the callers to the show and everything. But let's not make a rash decision here. I agree with you. The vast majority of rank and file military people might side with the president because all of the military people I know do tend to be strict constitutionalists. But don't forget, part of basic training is also to condition them to obey their superior officers no matter what. So the question would really come down to how much of the command structure would be on Trump's side and how much of the command structure would be on the side of the deep state. And if it's pretty much balanced 50-50, then you're talking a really serious major civil war, and it would not be over quickly. It would be 4 years maybe.
If the economy crashes, you might see more bloodshed than the kind of a civil war you're describing. Again, I'm telling you, the majority of the military would be on the side of patriots. They're not, when I was in the military, do you think I paid attention to what these clowns said about, your loyalty to your top ranks and all that? No. I had if somebody would ever told me to fire on an American citizen, like, take away their guns or something like that, I'd have turned that gun around and blown and shot the officer giving me that instruction right in the head. And most of the troops I know would have done the same thing. Soldiers are loyal to this country and to the Constitution. They're not loyal to these generals. They know how these generals get to where they're going, where they're at. You don't have good generals anymore. It's not like World War II, where you either had good generals or the country was going to lose, and we'd be speaking German and Japanese. That's how serious that was.
Yes.
Instead, you don't have good generals. The best soldiers are usually your enlisted men and your mid-level officers going right up to colonel. And most good colonels don't make it to general. And look at the guy like generals like Colonel Schaefer and others that have never made it to general because they were too good. They're too honest. The only one I do know that made it was Flynn, and I'm surprised he made it as far as because he was good. He was a patriot. He is a patriot, I mean. But all in all, for the most part, the best do not get it to flag rank. Not in the Navy, not in the Army, not in the Marines, not in the Air Force. So
well, I agree with you that, especially with regard to the Navy because of the Fat Leonard scandal here. But, Mark, before I let you go, I just want to make something very, very clear. Call me an optimist. I still think there is a way out of this mess that does not involve either a nuclear war or a civil war, and I'm going to continue to pursue that path. I'm looking for a Gandhi-esque solution to all of this, and I reject this idea that it's time to start pulling triggers. Because from my estimation, the ordinary American citizen, even though they have guns guaranteed to them by the Second Amendment, the ordinary American population, I don't think they're ready for a violent revolution. The slaughter would just be absolutely immense. Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. First thing I want to say is that the time to get worried about Trump is when you don't see all these deep state attacks on him, when you don't see this orchestrated New York Times with the Bob Woodward book, with the John McCain funeral. I mean, it's so orchestrated, it's so transparent. When I will be worried about Trump is when I don't see these deep state attacks anymore. That's the time to worry. What you're seeing now is the panic and reaction from the deep state. They are really, they don't know what to do. He's slowly rooting the people out at the Justice Department. By the way, McCabe is being brought before a grand jury as we speak. And, of course, they're not talking about that. They'd rather talk about Woodward's book.
Yeah.
Now, 6 months ago, McCabe was a huge story, wasn't it?
Yep.
Now he's going before a grand jury and not a peep about it, except I read it on Zero Hedge. So, I got to tell you, if you watch the mainstream media, yes, things, everything looks like chaos in the Trump Justice Department and the this and the that. But to tell you the truth, the fact that you got to look at who these people are, why they're trying to sow this dissension and attack Trump at every single level. It's almost comical, the stuff they attack him every day. They had this lady at Kavanaugh's hearing, and she had her hand a certain way, and they were saying she's giving white power salutes. I mean, they are so really, and it turns out she's Mexican and half Jewish, and they're just so unhinged that really, to me, I think it's all very positive as a Trump supporter. I'm very happy that these people are still going absolutely nuts. It tells me that he hasn't made a deal with them, that he's still attacking them, and that he's still got a lot of power, or they wouldn't be so hysterical about it. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about was the hysteria at this Kavanaugh hearing, like watching these protesters getting up and hysterical, mostly women, and it's and I hear people say, oh, well, we got to deal with these people. You can't deal with lunatics like this.
Especially paid lunatics.
Ask you this question. Yeah, they're paid. If I showed up at that hearing and I shouted out, Dianne Feinstein's a Chinese spy, and how did her husband make billions of dollars in China? I would get tased. I would get beaten, and I would probably spend 6 months in jail as a right-wing crazy. Why are to me, the double standard in the protest movement, remember that guy, don't tase me, bro, for just asking John Kerry a question? And yet, they let these feminists, these homosexual activists, these black group activists, all these left-wing activists are giving free passes. I can't believe what I'm watching on TV. Every 20 minutes, 3 or 4 lunatics get up and start hollering, and whether they're paid or not, why are they not getting the same? You know what would happen if I showed up, like I said, and I said, Feinstein's a Chinese spy, I'd get hit over the head so fast and tased and bagged and put away. Yep. And this is why there might be a civil war in this country, because of the double standard is more than anything. I called my senators about this fact, saying, why is Chuck Grassley, I have both Republican senators here. I said, why doesn't he get control of this hearing? I said, I know where Washington is. I'll drive down there and I'll smack one of them, give them a good beating. I said, how's that going? Is this what's going to happen? Because this is what's going to happen if you allow this lawlessness to continue. I was a protester. I protested 9/11. I was outside courthouses, the Daytona 500, but I never did anything disrespectful like that. I wasn't in people's face and blocking their driving or anything like that. And so I'm not against protesting, but this is just hysterical disruption. It's not about getting a message out.
Yeah,
and,
it
I don't
absolutely
think,
is.
And like I said, I don't know if we can have you can have peace with people like that. I think you need to punch them in the mouth.
Well, hold
No
it. Let's back off on that, because two wrongs don't make a right. And I agree, we need to find a way to bring civility back into the political dialogue. But when you have the left is coming from a position where they're out of ideas, and the agendas that they're pushing are being rejected by ordinary Americans, like this thing about the bathrooms, all they have left is to just confront and get in the face and go on the constant attack. And they're being encouraged to do so by people like Maxine Waters. And the other day there was that wonderful article. All of these liberal snowflakes, they're not actually being offended. They're looking for victims. They're looking for any against conservatives to just shut them down and convince them to stay silent. It's intimidation is really what it is.
Well, I think Kavanaugh should have invited about 12 bikers for Trump into that back room there, and that would have put an end to that. One quick thing, Mike, I've always thought, why doesn't Trump do something like they did back in Prohibition with the Untouchables? Form like a group of federal marshals and investigators and have them investigate the FBI and the Department of Justice. I mean, the president would have some kind of an authority to do that. And he could just say that being that the Department of Justice is so corrupt it can't investigate itself, and being that we need an outside group to look into this. I'm appointing so and so, some guy from outside of Washington, and maybe with the federal marshals or something, and do like an Untouchables, like they did because of the Prohibition and the corruption in the police forces.
Yeah, but the Untouchables is a great story, and it made a great movie and a great TV series. But you need to understand, the Untouchables didn't clean up the problem. Ultimately, Congress had to repeal Prohibition for the corruption to go away. As to whether Trump has the authority, I don't know. I'm going to have to go back in and take a look at the Constitution there. He could, in theory, declare one by executive order. But again, Trump is probably dealing with the realization that he's up against an enemy who is ultimately willing to kill him if necessary to keep their hands on the reins of power and wealth.
Well, if it's not a group like the Untouchables, then I agree with, I guess it was Dave before, about the martial law. I think that's his only option, because the Department of Justice is obviously, and it doesn't appear Sessions is obviously going to do what it's going to take in order to have the change that Trump represents and was elected to bring us. And once again, I do want to repeat that the fact that he's being attacked like this is an actual very good sign. I think that's something to be hopeful for.
In one way, yes, it speaks to Trump not going along willingly with the deep state. But on the other, it basically means the White House is in a state of turmoil, which means Trump is not being as effective as he ought to be as president of the United States of America. So ultimately, and I have to be very honest about this, I'm seeing in Donald Trump a much weaker man than we were hoping to get. He is easy to manipulate. He's subject to flattery. He's easy to get out of the White House on all these trips all over America to attend rallies, because he loves being in front of rallies. There's no question about that. Yeah, if you need Trump out of the office, just set him up with another rally and he's gone. But he does lack the strength of other leaders that we've had in there, like John Kennedy, for example. Anyway, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kevin, are you there?
Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes. There was a problem.
Yeah. Sessions is a Trojan horse, I believe, and that's not why I called in. And you kind of answered my question on why I called. My question was, do you think that we could stop this civil war I think it's going to happen. I really do. The way the things are out in the public, especially, I'm around West Virginia, I'm around Maryland, D.C. is not far from me, and it's absolutely crazy. It's insane.
I agree. There are so many groups who are already primed to use violence against each other, whether it's blacks against whites, liberals against conservatives, the LGBTQ community against, us white heterosexual males and so forth. And I agree. It's entirely possible. I wish I could say, no, it's never going to happen. I agree it's possible, but I'm going to do everything I can with what little influence I have to head that off, because the wrong people wind up dead and crippled in these kinds of things. And those who start civil wars and profit from them and orchestrate them, nothing really bad happens to them. Even on the losing side, most of them, say, I surrender, I surrender. Here's part of the plunder I have here, and they're off and running. I mean, if you look at how many Confederate officers were pardoned after the end of the Civil War, you see how that works. The officers, are untouchable. We'll let all the little rank and file soldiers get ground up in a giant meat grinder, along with all the civilians who get in the way. And that would be the real problem about the current situation, because there isn't a clearly delineated our side, their side, with like the Mason-Dixon line here. All of these various groups who are angry with each other are already stirred together all over the country. And that means the fighting, if it broke out, would be everywhere. And there wouldn't be any clear battle lines drawn. It would just be people, killing each other. Like, maybe that's where they got the idea for that TV show, The Purge, or the movie, The Purge.
I think it was, and I hate to say this, sometimes I ask the question, does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? I'm still pondering which way that goes, because I guess it could go either way. Well,
no, it doesn't. It's a one-way thing. Art can imitate life, but life ultimately has to life has to make sense at some point.
It don't right now. I mean, it's just crazy. And I'm the type of person, I don't think I could pull a firearm on another American. I don't think I could do it.
No.
I mean, and how many other people out there are like me?
I imagine quite a few. I mean, we're raised from birth to consider the taking of another human life is the ultimate taboo, as well we should. And I think before anybody starts talking about civil war, they should be looking in a mirror and honestly saying, could I actually get up there and pull a trigger on another American citizen, regardless of what race they are, color, orientation, or anything? It's another human being who salutes the American flag. Can I honestly pull a trigger on them? And if you can't, then you sit down and you start thinking about non-violent ways to bring about change.
And that's what we all need to do right now. We all need to do that, because this is going to get out of hand. This is going to get crazy, and we haven't seen anything yet. And I'm really afraid, what are we, 59, 60 some days outside of the midterm?
Yep.
I think something's going to happen before then. I'm really afraid. I think you called it the other day. Will America nuke itself? Absolutely we will. Absolutely. And that's what I'm afraid of. Obama said it, a nuke going off in a big city like New York or something.
All right, well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call, Kevin. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let's see, our next phone call is going to be Fran in Washington. Aloha, Fran. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, nui nui, Michael.
Aloha, nui nui.
Blessings to you and Claire.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring up, it's a miracle that the Constitution actually got written, because what we know now about wealthy, power-hungry men, essentially, what we know now about them, it must have been the same then. And so it's a miracle that the Constitution ever got written.
Well,
said,
you need to remember the context of the time. The Constitution was not written by the ultra-rich, ultra-powerful people of the day. In fact, the Founding Fathers had just finished kicking those people out of the country. The Constitution was written by ordinary businessmen who had day jobs, if you will. Being in the government back then was not a full-time career. Thomas Jefferson was a lawyer. Paul Revere was a silversmith. Ben Franklin was a publisher. John Adams sold insurance. They were all businessmen. They had their own businesses and their own livelihood, and they weren't looking at government to be this giant teat for them for the rest of their lives. The country wasn't even all that wealthy back then. So it wasn't until you had Alexander Hamilton came on in and started his machinations to lure the young United States back into the clutches of the private central banks of Europe that things began to get ugly.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll make this point and I'll make it quick. The one thing, one of the things that would have prevented where we are now with, which government allowed the corporations that were manufacturing bases, which government allowed them to move their operations offshore? Because it seems to me that if we're going to have a strong manufacturing base, those industries need to stay here. And it seems like it should be a responsibility being part of the structure of a manufacturing, nation to make strong trade possible. That should never happen. Those industries should not have been allowed to go off our shores. That being said, I think if we fall apart, one of the things we should do in the future then is to recognize when a manufacturer has a responsibility for the security of the nation and stay put.
Well, actually, it's the government that has that responsibility. Corporations are going to behave like corporations, but in our case, over the last 30 years, the government let us down, and they simply went with, whoever gives us the big campaign donations, we're going to loosen the rules and let them offshore. Anyway, Fran, got to let you go, got to do station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines, well, actually, we're going to take a few more phone calls, and then we're going to close the lines because I'm way, way behind on the news here. So let's go to Mike in Kentucky. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The topic of Civil War stuff. Methinks the lady doth protest too much, like the previous caller was pointing out. A lot of this stuff would seem to indicate that they don't want to. They want to do everything they can to get in the way of whatever Trump's agenda is, and I keep seeing, further. I wish I could find somebody that's got access to Pacers so I could confirm some of this stuff that's being thrown out there, screenshots or claimed screenshots and all these indictments. But I think, unfortunately, a civil war would not be allowed to happen if the United States goes into some kind of what looks like an extended period of chaos. I think the world community would probably try to demand some kind of stabilization force be brought in. I mean, even if that's one of the big strengths that America has is such a vast land. There's no army in the world that can occupy America, but yet we've got all kinds of vulnerable infrastructure. And what I kept hearing when Kim Jong, this crisis with North Korea and their nukes and their missiles and all this stuff, I actually heard somebody say, well, he doesn't have a re-entry vehicle, so he's not going to be able to nuke a city. Well, obviously not. I mean, he doesn't need to if he was that stupid. If he wanted to pop something up over California or Colorado, just like what happened in Hawaii, as you know. Yeah, when they put a nuke up about 400 or 500 miles, you're going to take down huge swaths of the electric grid. People's cars won't start. It'll probably take down a lot of people's cell phones and all kinds of stuff. I don't even think they know what could be taken out by an EMP at 400 or 500 miles. And you can imagine if the Israelis had some kind of covert devices that could be launched from fake satellite trucks or some conspiracy theory, they could go and do the same thing. If it looked like their lapdog was going out of control, they could pop one of those and blame it on anybody.
All right, well, let me back up here a little bit, because in the event that Trump were to attempt to use the military to reimpose order, and if the other half of the military were opposed to him, we're going to have a civil war. And I think the rest of the world would probably just sit back and let us have at it for a while until they figured out which side was likely to win, and then they'd come in and support that side. for the best post-war
It's entirely possible, but what I'm thinking
deal
is,
that they
though,
could. Can you let me complete my thought? Because there's
go
a
ahead.
factor that you left out.
There's a delay in the phone.
I understand that.
Delay.
I understand that, but here's the factor you left on out. The United States is a nuclear-armed nation, and depending upon which side, the pro-Trump, anti-Trump side, gets control of those nukes are there to deter aggression from outside, and they work very well doing that. And so that's why I don't think we would see the international community. I'm sure the United Nations would get up there and say, stop it, all of you, you're behaving like children, and they'd be right. But I don't think there would be a serious effort to try and invade the continental United States of America. Okay?
Well, the infrastructure that they would be concerned about guarding would not be the missiles, I don't think, because if you remember your Dr. Strangelove, what was the big thing about the Soviet Union? And we were in the height of the Cold War. We had the bomber gap, the missile gap, and all this propaganda to prop up the boogeyman of the Soviet Union. We've been sitting here for probably, mid-70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, probably around 20, almost 40 years. They've had enough stuff sitting around here that if a solar flare or an EMP happened within a few weeks, the amount of smoldering Fukushima stuff that would go around the Northern Hemisphere is an existential threat to most of civilization.
I agree.
So if they saw that the United States, and I think a lot of these world leaders and stuff know this, that America has in effect a de facto doomsday weapon. If they saw America falling into chaos, they would probably get in the United Nations and the League of Nations, and they'd start calling for some kind of stabilization force to be implemented, and would probably put some pressure. You know, they've got us by the short hairs with this fake dollar too. I mean, if they, how many of these countries have started selling off market U.S. Treasuries? Like they've been laundering a bunch of it through Belgium for years.
Well, Russia's dumping most of their treasuries. A lot of other countries are following suit, and they're stopping the use of the U.S. dollar. Anyway, getting on back to the situation, again, looking at the strategic realities, were there to be a significant civil war in the United States, I don't see the rest of the world as willing to risk a nuclear strike to come on in and sort out the mess. In fact, if anything, I think probably most of these other nations that have been abused by the U.S. government in recent times would sit back and say, finally, they're getting what they deserve, and we're not going to have to deal with their bullying any longer. So anyway, thank you.
I think it would be real easy to reorganize again under bankruptcy, because basically that's what they've done how many times. After September 11th, they shuffled everything around under Homeland Security and reorganized the entire bureaucracy. And at one point, didn't they even switch the flags on the uniforms from one shoulder to another?
I really don't know. Anyway, I need to let you go because we've got other callers waiting on the line, and I need to get through them and get back to the news. Mike in North Carolina. Boy, you've got a lot of mics here. We've got 4 mics here. Does that beat 2 of a kind? Anyway, Mike, North Carolina, what's on your mind?
Well, I've been hearing everything about Trump, how things are going, but I just see more refugees on the bus and in the library and at Walmart pushing their kids around. And I don't know. It seems like we're still threatening Syria, and it sure seems like everything is just, it's an illusion or it's like a ruse. I don't see a whole lot of things that are really that much different. And so that's just all I got to say, I guess.
Well, again, we're dealing with Trump has been successfully collared, if you will, and controlled. And he's basically, if this op-ed in the New York Times is the real deal, then Trump's White House is full of people who don't want him to change anything at all. And that may be what we're really seeing here. Certainly, we know the military-industrial complex does not want to change to the war policy. The liberals don't want to change to the immigration policy. The bankers don't want to change to the economic policy. They all love things just the way they are because it works for them. It gets them what they want. And the fact that we, the American people, are ultimately paying the price for all of this and we're not getting what we want is completely irrelevant to them. But the anger is building in the population, which is what's leading to people like some of the previous callers. You're saying, you know, civil war may not be a bad idea. And on that point, I disagree. Okay, it may in fact happen. I can't rule it out, but I'm going to try and find a way through this that doesn't involve a lot of ordinary Americans out there having at each other.
Well, I don't know about civil war. You know, I've seen there might be some violence breaking out in certain parts of the country, but I don't think anybody's going to organize and conscript anybody and issue weapons and advance troops into certain areas. People are on their phones too much. Americans are living too well still. You know, they're far from getting in any kind of organized,
well, you're forgetting the scenario that prompted this Civil War discussion, and that was Donald Trump ordering the military to basically start taking control of Department of Justice and FBI. And the issue was raised that not all of the military might support him on that. And if you have the military split against itself, that's a civil war with all the bells and whistles, including uniforms and weapons and formations and a command structure and all kinds of things that I do not want to see happen. Anyway, Mike, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates just now rejoining the network. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines because I'm way behind on the news here. All right, so Brian in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, long-time listener and first-time caller, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you do. I've been, like I said, listening to you for 4 years now, and basically, you woke me up, and I'm sure you've woken a lot of other people up, and just what you do is fantastic, and I hope you keep doing it. And if YouTube or whatever the powers that be kick you off, find another platform because we will follow you all the way.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words here. And yeah, Claire and I are going to keep doing this as long as we can or as long as it's necessary. And I'll be very honest. Way back, 24 years ago, you know, I thought this was just going to be a kind of a short-term project, that we were going to get justice in the murder of Vincent Foster. The government was going to stand up and say, oh, yeah, we got some bad people inside the government. We're going to start prosecutions. And that would be the end of it. And I'd go back to movies, and Claire would go back to her music, and life would go on as it did before. And unfortunately, the lesson of the last 24 years has been that our government is so unbelievably corrupt, far worse than anybody could have imagined in their worst nightmare. And the more we dig at it, the worse it gets.
Yeah, and it's probably true for like all Western countries. All our governments are taken over, and what we just get are the MSM spin and the lies, and just keep the the storyline going. But I just wanted to back up. Why I called was when I was a kid, my dad used to tell me, if you want anything of quality, buy it from the USA. And I was just, 6, 7 years old, and he used to tell me that, and I didn't think much of it. But now he's passed away, but I still have a lot of his tools, and he has a level, 16-inch carpenter level, cast iron, made in the USA. And this is probably, we're going on 50, 60 years now, and I still use it. It's amazing. I might need a little bit of spit and polish on it, but that's the way things were back then. And as you have reiterated so many times that you don't manufacture anymore. And another point is, like, I've got a million points, but I bought 2 razors now, and the batteries, they crap out. You can't replace them because they're these funky, stupid batteries, and you have to throw the thing out, and you have to buy another one.
Yep.
Same thing for microwaves, washing machines. Just go down the list. It's just crazy.
It's planned obsolescence, and the idea is to keep us spending our money to buy the same thing over and over and over again because it's more profitable for the corporations. And it amazes me that all these environmentalists who are out there screaming about our plastic bags and global warming are strangely silent on the American model of business, which is to dig up our dwindling natural resources, minerals and so forth, manufacture them into a gizmo that lasts 6 months to a year. It then goes in a landfill carrying all the toxic chemicals with it, and the process starts all over again. It's very wasteful. It's very bad for the environment. And you're absolutely right. When I was young, America did make the best products. And we were prosperous because the rest of the world were willing to pay that extra money to get American-made products. But as American corporations decided to value engineer their products to maximize profits, we lost that edge. And other countries like China and Taiwan and Japan, they've now soared way past us. They've got, millions and millions of manufacturing jobs, good paying manufacturing jobs using technology that was invented in this country and foolishly allowed to leave.
Of course, because when they're going to acquire that, the plant and the technology and their engineers, of course there's going to be some bleed through, and they're going to see how it was made, and they're going to re-engineer it and re-up it, or they'll make whatever you want. But I guess my final point is that we should just, like you said, do the Gandhi approach, back away from the system. Don't buy, like your caller, I forget, somewhere there, talks about Walmart all the time. Don't buy from there. Don't buy from Amazon. Don't buy from the big conglomerates. Just shop local. Mm-hmm. Support your local business, and do that. And then at the same time, call up your congressman, your people, and just tell them, what your concerns are, and just back away from the system. I think that's the best thing, because we have the numbers. We're the ones that spend the money, so don't spend the money to these companies and corporations that are just basically taking from us.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, our members of Congress are not going to really listen to our concerns because they have aligned with the corporate interests, because they're getting a lot of money, campaign donations and various other emoluments. And that, of course, is the classic definition of a fascistic governmental system. When government power and corporate interest are aligned together against the general population, that is fascism. And that's not me saying that. That comes from Benito Mussolini, who we all know got the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk. And ultimately did pay the price for it.
Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that so many people have called and said, how do we actually change the system? Okay, if we can't do it directly to the government, then we have to do it as the people. We, the people, we decide where the money goes, and then, because it's always follow the money. They will follow the money, and if they're losing business, then maybe they'll realize that what they're doing is wrong. So I know it's not a grand sweeping gesture, but I'm trying to figure out, how do we actually change things?
Well, I imagine over at Nike right about now, they're learning that lesson the hard way. Right. Yeah. Okay, Mike, that's all I had, and it was great to talk to you, and a shout out to Layla from Ontario. All right, well, thanks an awful lot here. And the hard part, though, is capturing the public's imagination to motivate them to do things like boycotts on a massive, massive scale. That was one of the things Gandhi was able to do amazingly, is that all of India was listening to him. And when he said, we're going to take a few days off for prayer and fasting, which was his code word for a general strike, everybody went along with it. If you call for a boycott and maybe 30, 40 people say, yeah, we'll do that, it really lacks any kind of an impact. So you have to capture the imagination of the people and say, yeah, this is a real issue, and we have to do something about it. Okay, so we're going to close the phone lines for a little bit because I'm way behind on the news. Getting on back to the Skripal case here. A Russian diplomat, Vasily Nebenzia, is saying that all of these British allegations are a cocktail of lies, and say they have there's no connection between Russia and what happened in Great Britain, and said that the promised breakthrough in the case turned out to be disappointing, and simply continued a pattern of baseless accusations against Moscow by the British side. And the British stated the two suspects most likely used aliases when entering Britain, which begs the question how anybody knew that they were Russian nationals, let alone agents of the Russian government. You can't have it both ways. And the British authorities are refusing to hand over to Russia what information they have on the suspects, including their fingerprints, which they had to provide to get a visa. And obviously the fingerprints would make it possible to identify these people and find out who they really are. But London is stonewalling on this. So it does stink. And there are all kinds of inconsistencies in the narrative. Now, this so-called breakthrough consists of these closed-circuit TV camera images of these two guys who look like they were sent over from central casting to be Russian villains in movies and TV shows. We do that, comrade. And they just have a bunch of pictures of them arriving, walking around. No pictures of them anywhere near the Skripal residence. It's all by implication. And there's a little wrinkle in the pictures that I will elucidate on when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're still talking about the Skripal case and the great breakthrough in the investigation are these closed-circuit television images of these two gentlemen that Britain says entered the country using aliases, but somehow Britain knows they're actually Russian agents without explaining how. And as we mentioned before the commercial break, Britain is refusing to share the fingerprints of these gentlemen from the visas with Russia to try and identify them. Basically, Britain is taking the position of, we've got these pictures, we're not going to try and extradite them because Russia won't give them back to us anyway. Case closed, let's move forward, Russia's guilty. It's a bum's rush here. So they've got all these pictures of these two guys walking around Salisbury, and the headlines are trying to spin it that the casualness with which these two are window shopping betrays what cold, vicious killers they are. Now, if you take away the captions and everything and you just look at the pictures, it looks like two guys window shopping. They're looking in the window of a coin shop. They're just looking at coins, antique coins. That's what it looks like. And it makes no sense. Because if they have just committed an assassination, left poison, okay, they're going to want to get out of the area. They're not going to run. They're not going to act suspicious. But they're not going to stop and window shop. It just doesn't make sense. They're just going to stroll on out because they know that Britain is just covered with closed-circuit TV cameras, and the longer they stay in Salisbury, the more their pictures are going to be taken. It doesn't make any sense. Now, there's also a problem with the timeline, because the official story is that the Skripals touched the door handle at about 9 a.m., which is when they got exposed to the supposed Novichok. But these closed-circuit TV cameras don't show these two suspects showing up in Salisbury until 11:48. So there's a timeline problem. Now, George Galloway has gone out there and said that this is not a slam dunk. Even though the British government is trying to act like the case is closed, they've solved it, and everybody should just believe it. George Galloway is out there saying that no. What's going on is the British public has become very cynical, very suspicious. They don't trust their government and media any more than we trust ours. And the reality is the British people aren't buying this any more than the Russians are and any more than I am here. Now, Skripal's niece did an interview saying that claims that Russia is behind the attack could be a hoax, and she said that she doubts that Sergei Skripal is even still alive because nobody has seen him since March. So it's a mess, and like all other government corporate media lies, they're stuck with it. They're going to have to keep on propping it up and promoting it and attacking anybody who doubts it from now until the empire falls. That's the problem with these big lies, whether it's the Skripal case, 9/11, the John F. Kennedy assassination. It becomes a permanent burden on the government to maintain these lies in perpetuity here. But having declared by imperial edict that Russia did it, even though Russia had no motive to do something like that, Theresa May is vowing to launch a cyber attack on Putin's spy network, cyber warfare on Russia. Now, I got to tell you, if you were to use this Skripal story as fertilizer, I'll bet you could double Britain's agricultural output. That's how potent it is. And none may abide before it here. Meanwhile, pressure is being brought to bear on Corbyn to go along with the idea that the Russian state is to blame for Salisbury. Now, he's been calling for cooperation with Moscow. He doesn't want a war, but he's having pressure applied to him, say that Russia did it. Say that Russia did it. Where's your proof? We don't need proof. We're just telling you, say that Russia did it here. Story broke over one of the commercial breaks here. It goes back to Syria, and this is really pushing the propaganda. And the story is how the poor children of Syria have nothing to protect them from Assad's chemical weapons except for gas masks made out of paper cups. That was the shark right there. And they have a picture of somebody with plastic over his face and head, and there's a paper cup over his mouth that is supposedly filled with cotton and charcoal to protect themselves. They are really ramping it up. And again, one more time, if Assad was stupid enough to use chemical weapons, why would he use them on children? Why not use them on the terrorists? Why not use them on ISIS and Al-Qaeda? And by the way, have you noticed that none of these so-called Assad chemical weapons attacks have hit military personnel? It's always been civilians to maximize the shock and sympathy value. Oh, the children, the children, the children. If Assad were behind using these chemical weapons, it would be ISIS and Al-Qaeda being attacked, but it never, ever is. You got to start thinking for yourself, people. That's really going to make the government very, very nervous if you start thinking for yourself. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, President Trump has decided to chair a United Nations Security Council meeting against Iran. And Iran has come back saying that what Trump is trying to do is divert the world's attention from American and Israeli violations of international law and the very same council's resolutions, which have gone pretty much ignored. And yeah, it does seem like grandstanding, but we do know that ultimately Iran is in the crosshairs. The private central bankers want Iran enslaved to a private central bank. The U.S. economy wants Iran's oil sold only for the U.S. dollar. Israel wants Iran smashed up as a regional power. So, yeah, the wars go on. I think future history books are going to say we were already in the World War at this point. We haven't had the big bang like the Lusitania sinking or Pearl Harbor. Maybe that's about to come. Weld all these little tiny wars all over the planet into one big giant war. Yes, it's a world war. Gosh, won't it be fun? Apparently, the Trump administration is now briefing U.S. Jewish groups on the new version of the Israel-Palestine peace deal. First one was not well accepted. I don't think this one is going to go down very well. Interestingly enough, during the event, Nikki Haley told attendees the U.S. is considering suspending all aid to countries who vote against Israel at the United Nations. Talk about extortion. It's exactly what it is. And once again, we see the U.S. weaponizing the dollar as a political tool. I would not be surprised if some of those countries would come on back and say, you can keep your money, we're going to vote our conscience. Because we cannot allow the United States using money to subvert the last problem-solving, peacemaking mechanism left on the planet. Because if the UN is simply for sale to the highest bidder, then there's nothing left preventing a world war. Now, here's a little interesting article, and it's from Mondoweiss. It's a different take on what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, where they just came on out, anti-Semitism, and basically says the instant Palestinians get support from someone who might gain power, out comes the anti-Semitism charge. And basically the gist of the article is there are a lot of people in positions of power who do empathize with what the Palestinians are being put through. But if any of them look like they might actually be in a position to win an election, Israel is going to attack and destroy them, to pull them down, to make sure they can't get into a position where they could actually help the Palestinian cause. And that was apparently a big part of what was going on with Jeremy Corbyn, along with this forcing the Tories to go along with this ridiculous International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And even the British media is still out there pushing the propaganda that this new definition of anti-Semitism is internationally recognized. Actually, no, it isn't. Very, very few countries have said, yeah, we're going to go along with this nonsense. And civil libertarians are out there saying, this is nonsense. You cannot equate criticism of a government with hate in order to block that criticism. That's ridiculous. That's like trying to block criticism of the Nazis by saying you just hate the German people. There was even, amazingly enough, an editorial in the New York Times saying that, no, criticizing Israel is not hate. But in the end, the Palestinians have been shafted by the British government, who caved into pressure from the pro-Israel lobby to adopt that definition, saying that criticism of Israel's government represents hatred of the Jewish people. And it's an absurd confluence, and everybody is saying so. And Israel is pushing to try and get this everywhere. They want to basically make it impossible for anywhere on earth to say Israel is doing wrong. And then what will Israel do after that? They will continue to do more wrong, because now they're immune from any kind of criticism. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel will act harshly against attempts by other Middle Eastern countries to obtain precision weapons. And he specifically targeted Iran, saying that we're going to prevent Iran and its proxies from establishing a military presence in Syria. If anybody's going to have a military presence in Syria, it will be us, like we have on the Golan Heights. So Netanyahu is out there talking tough and belligerently, and I don't know how serious he is about trying to go on in and attack the Iranian forces inside Syria, knowing that the Russian aviation is there, or if this is a desperate attempt to cling to power, because he's losing popularity, he's dealing with his corruption charges, and there are a lot of ordinary people in Israel who are just saying all of this war stuff, it's very, very tiring. And Israel's behavior, the behavior of Israel's government around the world, is actually making the world much more dangerous for the Jewish people. Now, this comes just a few days after Netanyahu visited the Dimona nuclear reactor, which is known to have a bomb factory in the basement of it, thanks to Mordecai Vanunu, and basically had a veiled threat of nuclear attack, saying, you know, warning Iran and others, Israel has the means to destroy them. Our enemies know very well what Israel is capable of doing. And then he said, the weak are slaughtered and erased from history. He's talking really, really tough. And in a way, he's basically acknowledged that Israel is a nuclear power. And that means that every single penny of foreign aid sent by the U.S. government, taken from your pocket and sent to Israel by the U.S. government, is a crime under United States law. Under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act. And I believe there's even one or two others. Nations that are in possession of nuclear technology and nuclear weapons that refuse to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and refuse to allow IAEA inspections are not allowed to receive U.S. financial aid. Now, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who very clearly is looking after Israel's interests and none others, is saying that he expects the Golan Heights will be part of Israel forever, which means they're getting ready to basically recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, even though every other nation on earth has rejected it. Israel wants all that oil and gas, and David Friedman is out there saying, sure, why not? Take the oil and gas, take the Golan, hang on to the illegal settlements. No reason for those people to have to leave there. Apparently, there's been another incident where 117 settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque under heavy police protection and basically went up to the Dome of the Rock and performed Jewish religious rituals, which, of course, is going to be very offensive to the Muslims. That would be kind of like you in a Christian church if Muslims came up to your church and started doing their religious rituals on your ground. A lot of people probably get very upset about that. But that's it. It's another provocation. They're trying to get the Palestinians to do something that would justify further military action by Israel against them. Now, earlier we were talking about this new peace plan that Trump is trying to put together. And it's not officially out, but some of the details are being leaked. And apparently what is being suggested is that Egypt will take over control of Gaza, and Jordan will take over control of the West Bank. And what this will mean is the Palestinians who are in Gaza and the West Bank will start to diffuse, maybe, into those other countries. At which point Israel can start talking about regaining Gaza and the West Bank, because I don't see Israel giving up any ground whatsoever. They still dream of Eretz Israel. Now, as you know, Donald Trump kicked over a hornet's nest when he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and a couple of other nations followed suit. One of them has had a change of heart. Paraguay has decided no, they're going to keep their embassy in Tel Aviv, and of course, Israel's government is out there screaming, you anti-Semites, you Jew haters, and they have responded by shutting the Israeli embassy in Asuncion and recalling their ambassador. Now, apparently over in Tripoli, there is a ceasefire going on. And there was a joint announcement by the governments of the United States, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Interesting how nobody from the Libyan government was involved in this. But inside the statement, there is an interesting quote. We reiterate our strong support for Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ghassan Salameh, as he works to realize an immediate and durable cessation of hostilities in the Libyan capital, which is a critical step to advancing the political process in accordance with the United Nations Actions Plan. In other words, Libya gets puppet rule again. They're getting a newly installed junta. Now, there was supposed to be a peace conference up in Geneva about what's going on in Yemen, and Houthi representatives have been prevented from flying to Geneva. Now, these talks are sponsored by the United Nations, And the claim is the United Nations could not secure the required authorizations from the Saudi-led coalition, which controls Yemen's airspace. So what's going on here is they're going to have a peace conference without having the Houthis there, in which they'll say the war is going to be over and we're going to reinstall the puppet government the Houthis were trying to throw out, and all will be well. We are in a period of colonialism all over again. It's covert. We don't hoist the American flag over all these countries that we've conquered. But the real world results are the same. Impoverished people, natural resources stripped, exploitation. Remember Tony Blair? Good old phony Tony Blair. He of the dodgy dossier and other lies about Iraq here. Apparently, his relationship with Saudi Arabia is now under scrutiny following revelations that the non-governmental organization set up under his name has received up to $12 million from Saudi Arabia. Now, $12 million buys a lot of cooperation and bias. So we're actually seeing vast amounts of money at war with each other here. By the way, speaking of Saudi Arabia, be very careful what you write over there. There is a new law further criminalizing dissent, and now they're punishing what is called informational crime, which means if you post a satire piece that disturbs the public order, which is a very vague, tenuous description, you can get 5 years in prison and an $800,000 fine for posting satire. Remember when the United States used to actually stand for the Bill of Rights? And now here we're all buddy-buddy and friends with all these dictatorships all around the world? Because it makes money. And if it makes money, it's good. And if it doesn't make money, it's bad here. Over in China, a British amphibious assault vehicle, the HMS Albion, 22,000 tons, big ship, carrying a contingent of Royal Marines, sailed past one of the islands in the South China Sea, in the Paracels, and was confronted by Chinese ships saying, "You are in our territorial waters." And the British ship went on its way. There was no confrontation, no conflict, as it were. Part of the problem are the definitions, because the definition of territorial waters varies based on whether it's a coastline or an island or something like that. And right now, the argument is being put forward that these artificial islands built by China do not have territorial waters at all. Now, this is nonsense, because China didn't just create these islands out of thin air. They went to islands that were already there and simply built them up. So the territorial waters rule that applies to islands should apply there. But again, it's another pushing for a confrontation here with China. Does the United States really think it can go to war with all these countries all at the same time? Now, up in North Korea, Kim Jong-un is vowing there will be a nuclear-free Korea. And he's coming up on another summit with South Korea, in which I'm willing to wager a jar of kimchi that they're talking about reunification. Now, this announcement, this recommitment to denuclearization is a major announcement, because U.S. officials have been saying, no, it's not going to happen. North Korea is not doing enough. They're not doing it fast enough. And as we reported yesterday, the impasse is really the fact that North Korea feels they have already made a lot of concessions. They've shut down their nuclear test site. They've dismantled their rocket engine test stand. They've returned the remains of U.S. soldiers who were lost during the start of the Korean War. And they're allowing people from South Korea to come visit family that they haven't seen in all these years of the war. And they're talking about opening up all the bridges and railroad lines across the DMZ. And they're waiting for the United States to demonstrate something in good faith. The U.S. hasn't. The U.S. is still running those military drills off the coast. The U.S. attitude seems to be, you give us everything we want, then we'll do something nice for you. And that is not going to sit well with the Asian mindset. Trump is getting bad advice on how to deal with these people. Or the advice he's getting is, who cares what their sensibilities are? Just bludgeon them into doing what we want here. One of the big sticking points that North Korea really wants, and this is hanging it up, is the North Koreans want a formal end to the Korea War. They want a peace declaration. South Korea is fully on board with this. South Korea and North Korea want to formally end the Korean War. It is the United States that is resisting this. And you know why? Because the instant there's a peace deal, the United States has to acknowledge they didn't win that war. And they don't want to do that. They want to save face. They'd rather have a whole new Korean War than admit that they botched up the first one. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So let's turn to the domestic politics, and boy, we're way behind on the talking points here. The Kavanaugh hearings continued today. More protests, more antics, more... It's turning into a circus. And if you look at the behavior of the Democrats, they're coming across like this lynch mob of irrational and angry haters. Now, Dianne Feinstein went on the attack against Kavanaugh, telling him he needed to reconcile his Second Amendment reasoning with the hundreds of school shootings. And she cited this statistic, which, as we reported yesterday, turned out to be completely made up. Never really happened. But she's out there saying, how do you reconcile that? And you need to remember, Feinstein wrote the federal assault weapon ban that expired in 2004. Now she's pushing a new, broader version of the law. And so she asked Kavanaugh to explain why he concluded that such legislation is unconstitutional. Well, it is. That Second Amendment is pretty, clear. And basically, the shootings are irrelevant to the question of whether banning assault weapons is consistent with the Second Amendment. If you want the guns banned, you have to basically get rid of the Second Amendment. And to do that takes another amendment. And one of the things that really bothers me about the liberals, and especially the liberal Supreme Court, is they really don't have much loyalty to that Constitution. They think it should be twisted and bent and cracked and just, tied in knots to justify what they want when they want it here. Now, Feinstein was apparently behind this little stunt that came out yesterday, where a father of one of the victims of Parkland approached Brett Kavanaugh with his hand outstretched for a handshake, and Kavanaugh appeared to not take the handshake. And of course, the Democrats went ballistic, saying, "Oh, Brett Kavanaugh, how could he be so cruel? This man has lost his child," and blah, blah, blah. Another video from a different angle has surfaced showing that it was Kavanaugh's security who intervened to block the handshake. But then the Democrats, and for that matter, the corporate media's relationship with the truth is tenuous at best, to put it politely. Now, as you know, it came on out that these people who were going wacko inside and outside the hearings were being paid. Witnesses saw them literally being handled bundles of cash out of a bag, and it was even caught on both photo and video. And internet sleuths identified the man who was handing out the cash. He works for a Soros-funded organization. Just unbridled corruption going on here. Now, Cher has stepped out into the limelight again, saying that our lives will never be the same if blank train wreck Kavanaugh is confirmed. And she came on out claiming that if Kavanaugh is confirmed, it would lead to the repression of LGBT people, an overturn of Roe versus Wade, people of color losing the right to vote, and a situation where Trump would have immunity from criminal prosecution. Now, the one that really stands out is people of color losing the right to vote. Is she talking about the American black population losing the right to vote, or is she talking about the illegal immigrants who are also people of color the Democrats depend on to win in November? All right, so we're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back with more news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And getting on back to that statistic that Dianne Feinstein was wagging in front of Kavanaugh's nose here. The U.S. Department of Education falsely reported 235 school shootings in 2015 and 2016. And somebody went back and they double-checked the way NPR did with the more recent figures. And what they found out, there were only 29. It's all a fake. It's all a fake to push the gun grabber agenda. Now, obviously, Donald Trump is very angry over people who spoke out of turn, both to Woodward and this anonymous New York Times opinion piece. And he's got every right to be angry. He's the aggrieved party here. And for anybody to be talking out of turn, to be leaking, it's disrespectful and it's unprofessional. And I understand Washington, D.C. lives on leaks. Leaks are the coin of the realm. If you want a nice dinner, you leak something to pay for it. And Trump is asking his aides that he trusts to try and discover who was leaking private White House conversations to Woodward. And they're pushing him into a Nixon situation. Nixon had the same problem. He had leaks all over the place. That was what his plumber squad was about. That eventually became the dirty trick squad for his second run for the office during Watergate. But originally, it was an anti-leak squad codenamed the Plumbers. And Trump needs one right now. Now, I do not see the timing of the Woodward book and that Washington Post op-ed as a coincidence. I'm starting to think this is a psych war against Donald Trump. To get him angry, to get him to lose his focus on what's going on, to basically get the entire White House staff suspicious, angry, pointing fingers at each other, to keep them confused and turmoil here. Now, Trump is urging the New York Times to reveal its White House resistance insider, and basically hinted that it might actually be phony, which is what I think there's a good case for that. So Trump came on out and saying, you know, that this anonymous person is gutless, and if they actually do exist, the New York Times must, for national security purposes, turn him or her over to the government at once. Now, of course, the New York Times will say, well, we have to protect our sources, First Amendment, blah, 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 blah. But everybody's speculating about what's going on, and that may be the goal of the psych op, is to get us all wondering, who are these anonymous sources, so we're not paying attention elsewhere. So we have to be very careful. So, story coming out of the Political Insider, where they're out there saying, what do we know about the anonymous anti-Trump op-ed writer? And there really wasn't much within the op-ed that was going to give it away, except the word lodestone, which apparently is a word that Mike Pence likes to use a lot, but then so do I. He's already denied he wrote it. In fact, pretty much everybody in the White House is saying, no, they didn't write it. Of course, they'd be foolish to admit it if they did. They'd be shown the door. But again, I'm starting to have a suspicion that the New York Times just made this up out of thin air to sow suspicion and distrust within the White House staff. That this anonymous op-ed and the two more that have now come forward saying, yes, there's a massive resistance inside the White House. I think it's a psych operation against Donald Trump. And I think taking this story at face value, Trump is fully justified in just cleaning out the White House staff of everybody that he's not sure he can 100% trust. Just get them out. They're not under contract. They don't have a union. Trump has the authority to fire them at his discretion. And yes, everybody's going to say, oh, bad Trump, he's being paranoid. But no, look what's happening at the New York Times. Look what's happening with Woodward's. He's under constant attack. If he's not paranoid by now, he's got every reason to be. So as I said before, Mike Pence has already gone on record saying that no, he didn't write the resistance op-ed. But again, apparently over at Axios, 2 more anonymous White House officials confirmed they're sabotaging Trump. It's time to put on those brass knuckles there. Those presidential brass knuckles. Now, another story coming on out. This is from Roger Stone. And he's basically saying that, Bob Woodward has been portrayed as this crusading journalist. But the fact of the matter is he's been caught lying many times in his career and basically serving propaganda interests. And as I mentioned yesterday, the reason Woodward and Bernstein and the Washington Post went after Nixon was because Nixon was becoming a threat to the war machine. He wanted to end the war in Vietnam. He'd gone to China and opened it up for trade, which ended the need for a Cold War against China. And then he went to Moscow and he basically started the process that led to détente, which ended the need for a constant Cold War against Russia. And that's the reason Nixon had to be gotten rid of. But it was too soon after Kennedy, so they had to find a more subtle way to get rid of him, and Bob Woodward appears to have been right at the heart of it. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And over at Robert Mueller, they're getting ready to issue a final report. They have no indictments against Trump. They have actually no evidence against regarding Russian collusion. They have a lot of rumor and innuendo. And Mueller apparently wants to just go ahead and make that public so the Democrats can grab it and say this is grounds for impeachment, even though there's nothing impeachable in it. But there is a little bit of a roadblock because there's a court case stemming from the apparent murder of a Columbia University professor 60 years ago. And the substance of the case is entirely unrelated to the investigation, but it's a procedural situation. Because the Washington Appeals Court is set to hear this case next month. If it sides with the Justice Department and rules that judges don't have the freedom to release grand jury information that is usually kept secret, then it throws a monkey wrench into any plans Mueller has to issue this report. He'd be in violation of the law if he did. Which means he may go ahead and do it anyway. Now, a story coming out of Sarakarta. There are indications that President Trump may go ahead and declassify the 20 FISA documents Congress wants. Now, they already got these redacted ones that were full of all kinds of black marks here, and the Department of Justice has been stonewalling releasing the unredacted documents, saying that it's going to reveal explosive information about the FBI's handling of the Trump-Russia investigation, meaning it's going to be an embarrassment to the agency. And you remember the first commandment of J. Edgar Hoover, never embarrass the agency. But it looks like Trump may resist that pressure from the Department of Justice and may declassify those documents. And it will be interesting to see what is in those as well here. Okay. Now, Judicial Watch, they're still doing good work. And by the way, if Trump decides to clean out the government and bring some people in from outside, Larry Klayman, I would love to see Larry Klayman as the Attorney General or a special investigator, special prosecutor. Boy, would he go after them. Anyway, Judicial Watch has sued the Justice Department for all communications between Bruce Orr, Nellie Orr, Christopher Steele, and Fusion GPS. Why is Judicial Watch having to sue the Department of Justice? Because the Department of Justice refuses to honor a Freedom of Information Act request. Now, these documents are all public records. They're the property of the American people. They are not classified military secrets. The Department of Justice has no legal justification to withhold them. They just are trying to exhaust Judicial Watch, to run out the clock, to bankrupt them with all the lawyer fees here. Now, Abby Martin has stepped on out to talk about this campaign of censorship and intimidation against the independent media, saying that basically corporate media is trying to curate our reality. I love that expression. They want to curate the reality. This is what we think you should think reality is. And that, of course, is what corporate media has been doing, for a very, very long time, going all the way back to when the Hearst newspapers sold us the Spanish-American War. But in the age of the internet and the independent media, they can't do that anymore. And they're just now realizing that, so they're going on the warpath. They're going on the assault here. And they shut down Telesur, which is where Abby Martin had been broadcasting, but she still has contacts at Russia Today. The government wants to go back to a world in which you believe the world is what they tell you it is. And no matter how many times they are caught lying to you, you will go on believing them no matter what, because you're a loyal, patriotic American. And loyal, patriotic Americans never think. They never use their brains. They just believe as they're told to believe here. As you know, the chief executives of the social media have been testifying before Congress. And apparently Google's senior executive didn't even bother showing up. But Twitter chief executive Jack Dorsey told U.S. lawmakers the company's algorithms have not always been impartial. He said the platform unfairly reduced the visibility of 600,000 accounts, including some members of Congress. But he was unable to say whether they were Republican or Democrat or both. Now, several Republicans, including Trump, have accused Twitter of bias, which the company denies. And Dorsey was saying Twitter does not use political ideology to make any decisions. However, he says the company does make occasional mistakes. See, we're not really biased. It was just an honest error here. And let's see. Twitter, I think, has just banned InfoWars and Alex Jones. And I'm sure it's just a simple error. Yeah, Twitter bans Alex Jones and InfoWars. But there's no political bias. It's a mistake. They 3 strikes and he's out here. Now, Freedom Watch, this is Larry Klayman's outfit. After he left Judicial Watch and he moved down to Florida and he started a new organization, Freedom Watch, he has filed a class action lawsuit against Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Apple for conspiring to limit advocacy by conservatives and those who support President Donald Trump. Now, the lawsuit's been filed in the District of Columbia as of yesterday, and it named the 4 internet giants as defendants and charged them with violating Section 1 and 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act, the First Amendment, and Washington, D.C.'s discrimination law. And Freedom Watch is also accusing the internet entities of working with corporate media, including CNN and MSNBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, to intentionally suppress politically conservative content in order to take down Trump and his administration. Now, that is actually a soft coup d'etat in progress, is what they're trying to do. And if they fail, there'll be a hard coup d'etat. But Facebook is paying a price for this. A recent poll has found 44% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 27 have deleted the Facebook application. This is coming from Pew Research Center. And apparently 54% of Facebook users, ages 18 and older, have adjusted their privacy settings. So I got emails from people saying, why isn't YouTube and Twitter and Facebook banning you? Because I don't use them. I stopped using them first of the year. I'm probably not big enough to be an annoyance anyway. All right. Remember the Pentagon Papers? That whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, is saying that Julian Assange cannot be prosecuted under the Espionage Act because he is a journalist. Well, he's not exactly accurate. If Assange committed an act of espionage, being a journalist would not protect him. And there are a lot of espionage assets who are covered as journalists. That's a very, very common thing. But here is the way the law works. There is no journalism exception under Title 18. Assange's best defense is that he himself did not steal or copy the information. It was provided to him unsolicited and he merely made it public. Now, that is the law that protects news organizations from accusations of espionage when they come into possession of classified information. As long as Assange did not ask an individual to provide these files, technically he's in the clear. However, that may not be enough to deter a government that is currently openly flouting the law in order to get their enemies. See, that's a very, very thin line. And to all of my fellow people working in the independent media, you need to keep that in mind. If somebody sends you classified information, you decide what you want to do with it. Legally, technically, you're in the clear. But if you ask them to provide more, or even if they say, do you want more, and you say yes, then you are in a world of hurt. So just sort of keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk about the economy here. Over at the U.S. Mint, they have stopped the sales of Silver Eagle coins. And they've already informed some of their larger authorized dealers they're sold out. And they're only going to fill their current orders until further notice. Now, according to U.S. law 31 U.S.C. 5112E, the Mint must make silver coins available in sufficient quantities to meet demand no matter what the cost. What seems to be going on here is, first of all, people are getting into metals, which is a very smart thing to be doing. And two, the Mint may actually be out of silver. And if they start trying to buy a lot of silver, that's going to trip the prices up. That is going to trigger another buying frenzy. So they're just going to say, no, no more. We're not going to do that here. We have been talking about the state of the economy in the United States, where we have people in this country, especially in Silicon Valley, who have full-time jobs and are still living out of their cars because the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, because that's what fascism does. Over in Great Britain, thousands of nurses have been forced to rely on food banks in the last year because they're not making enough money to eat. They're paying their rent, they're paying the bills, they've got nothing left over, they have to go to the food banks. And we're not talking unskilled workers here. We're talking trained nurses. Apparently 9% of the nurses surveyed admitted to having collected free food. 38% said they struggle to buy food. And over half said they had less than 500 pounds to fall back on if a personal crisis were to strike. It's all over the world. The money is all up at the top. It's all being spent on war. And you know the real problem with the spending on the war? The money, you might as well throw it into a fire. You make something a weapon, it blows up, it blows something else up. The money is gone, the material is gone. There's nothing left. Apparently, the currency devaluation in Turkey was 42% so far this year, and we're continuing to see a crisis in the emerging markets. Everyone's talking about the possibility of a global crash. They were looking at the bond market. No, could actually emerge from the emerging markets currencies, which are all in trouble. The European Union has decided to prolong the anti-Russia sanctions by an additional 6 months. Because of what they did to Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. So it's more provocations, more putting pressure on Russia, and at some point something is going to break. Something is really going to break. Putin is now facing pressure from his own people that he's got to stand up for Russia's interests more. A Cold War is bad enough. A hot war is to be avoided. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, out in California, Governor Jerry Brown is considering a bill which is probably the worst example of a California public agency defaulting on the pension promises it made to its employees and allowing CalPERS to slash the incomes of its retirees. And apparently this bill was introduced by Assemblyman Freddie Rodriguez, Democrat of Pomona, and basically comes down to these people worked for these companies. They paid into the pensions. They made their retirement plans based on what the pensions were going to make them. And now, because the economy has tightened up, they're going to get screwed, for lack of a better word. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why California doesn't have the money to rectify the situation is because they're paying for all those illegal immigrants. So they'll vote Democratic. Keep the Democrats in power doing the wonderful job that they're doing here so far. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start taking phone calls here. Chris in Detroit, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. I really enjoy your show and the information that you put out. I'm wondering, I don't know if you've mentioned it before, this 5G that's going up everywhere.
We've talked about it, and I know there's a lot of people who are out there trying to, turn it into some kind of an issue, or to be more accurate, a distraction. But it's simply, a faster version of 4G. And I don't think there's anything significant about 5G itself. I'm concerned about the sum total of all electromagnetic radiation that we're subjected to, whether it's 4G, 5G, the police radios, radars that we have down here in Pearl Harbor. I think there's an issue there that ought to be looked at, but I haven't seen anything specific about 5G to be concerned about.
Well, I'm not sure. Have you heard of Environmental Health Trust before with Dr. Deborah Davis? Are you familiar with her work at all?
Yeah, I've heard of it. And again, there are a lot of people who are out there, trying to boost their fame and image by crying wolf here. But again, thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to switch over to Cameron in Great Britain. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, good afternoon, Michael. Michael, quick chat about Trump with you. Hope is the only thing that can buy, time for the elite. And Trump is throwing hope, not by himself, obviously, but with this QAnon thing, which has Mossad's fingerprint all over it. You see, he hasn't done anything for people, except throwing confusion. I personally have really lost interest in American politics, because the more confusion they throw in, the clearer everything becomes. And your caller put his finger right at the point that he said, well, as long as the media is against Trump, I support him. And that's exactly the point. They do that. This is a Punch and Judy show.
I disagree with that, because from where I'm sitting, if in fact this anonymous op-ed in the New York Times is the real deal, it's very disturbing, because it does indicate that Trump is not in control of the White House, and he's got to fix that. Because if the White House is dysfunctional, then the deep state is going to win. But again, I need to stress the possibility that, coupled with the timing of Woodward's book, that this is a psych op against Donald Trump and the White House staff, to get them all riled up, to get them pointing fingers at each other, to get Donald Trump furious, which apparently he is. He's got a temper, and to basically break his focus about the things that he's supposed to be doing, which is running the nation. But frankly, taking these now 3 anonymous insiders who claim to be part of the White House resistance at face value, I think Trump is justified in starting to scrape out a lot of people from that staff and replace them.
But what's the likelihood of him doing that, Michael? He's been in there for over a year and 8 months now, and nothing has happened. He hasn't actually, he was supposed to be clearing the swamp, but the swamp is dirtier than ever before.
Yeah, the swamp, unfortunately, the swamp is winning. There's no question the swamp is winning. The only positive aspect about that is the American people now see that there is, in fact, a swamp. It's no longer considered fringe conspiracy theory. People openly talk about the deep state now. It's been outed. We see what's really going on behind the scenes.
Well, I hate to use this word, but I hope you're right. I hate this word, hope, and, I can't sort of use it anymore without feeling, a little bit tricked. Well, I hope you're right.
I generally avoid the word hope, especially since Obama's campaign exploited it so shamelessly here. Again, I'm as disappointed in the Trump administration as anybody, but he is the president, and I'm appalled at the machinations being used to try and get rid of him. Anyway, Cameron, we're going to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we got a bunch of callers waiting on the line, but I really have got some news stories I need to get out first before we run out of time. First of all, according to Western Journalism Center, apparently there is now a $50,000 reward for the identity of the person who claimed to be a high-ranking member of Trump's administration who wrote that anonymous op-ed for the New York Times and claimed they were working to actively protect the country from some of the president's actions. So, $50,000. Wow, $50,000. Oh, man, if I knew the identity, I'd go for that. $50,000, I could overhaul this studio. And then some here. The other story I wanted to get into, this is just a little bizarre here. Let me skip on down to this. The other day, we were talking about this plane that came from the Emirates and was stopped at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport with all kinds of sick travelers. And I was saying because of the speed with which they became sick might have been food poisoning. Well, it turns out it isn't. And the passengers on board are saying that at the Dubai airport, passengers who were obviously already ill, coughing, deep phlegm, were allowed onto the airplane. And those people who are not sick are wondering if they're going to. Because, you know, those little airplanes, those cabins, those are almost perfect environments to share germs and viruses with each other. The air is constantly recirculating, and yes, they're bringing in new air from outside and heating it to keep the oxygen levels up. But it's very easy to pass illnesses around inside those cabins. So with that in mind, all of a sudden, there's another story that came out on a flight from Algeria to France, which may have been infected with cholera. And apparently they had one child displaying the symptoms, and now they put the whole aircraft on quarantine. And now over in Philadelphia, they've had 2 flights land full of sick passengers showing flu-like symptoms. And the CDC is already out there investigating. 12 passengers were feeling ill, but they're giving medical screenings to everybody. And the affected passengers were returning from pilgrimages to Mecca. Now, that's kind of scary to have that happen 4 times. Are we dealing with an issue where the airlines are cutting back so much that they're not properly disinfecting the cabins or the air conditioning filters? Or is disease so totally out of control in the rest of the world that we can't get planes full of healthy people? I don't know, but it's kind of concerning. 4 of them happened here. All right, we're going to take a few more phone calls here. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, maybe it's because of the global open borders policy, which is bringing in all these diseases into the first and second world nations that were previously eradicated, that just it's generally increasing the likelihood that any average plane load full of people is just statistically got more diseases on it. Could be that.
Well, my question would be, I mean, all these airports now have security looking for bombs and terrorists and everything, and the passengers on that flight from Dubai are correct. Why didn't security say, hey, there's a medical issue here. These people are really very sick. But no, they're too busy looking for bombs and terrorists and things that they're not likely to find. And it underscores the fact that if there were a major pandemic outbreak, like they've got this nasty Ebola down in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now, if it gets on a plane, it can be everywhere in just 24 hours.
Well, it's good for business and good for population reduction and good for more screening processes. It's taken our rights away and good for more intervention and fees and waiting lines and groping and Anyway, so I just wanted to say that at this point, Trump is dead to me. And what the tipping point was is that when he was having these off-the-record comments to the Toronto Star newspaper in Canada, a Canadian newspaper, he at one point was talking about, well, you know, it's going to be completely one-sided in everything that we want. They're working their asses off, but, you know, the deal I'm going to give them is so bad that if I were to say it publicly, it would be so embarrassing that they would just have to say no. Okay, so he's not dead to me yet. I can deal with that. It's the next thing that he says. He goes, you know, like, I can't just kill these people. So, unless that's fake news.
Now,
if you say that, that's what it's being reported.
Who was he talking? Who was he talking about?
He was talking to the Canadian government, specifically the people he's negotiating with.
Okay, so who was he talking about?
Can I give Can I just expand a little bit to give my input on what that was about? Okay, so you got to keep in mind what you were covering about how the States is in so many wars all over the place right now, like dozens. And then you also have to consider how many drone strike assassinations that are going. And you got to remember that these Obama meetings, every once a week meeting to decide who's on the kill list to be illegally assassinated. Okay, so Trump is doing torture. He's doing drone strikes. He's got all these wars going. Part of the job right now is just murdering and killing people all over the world that you don't like. So what he actually did is he's like lamenting, regretfully, nostalgically, feeling bad, but that he can't just go and kill us. That he actually has to deal with this. That it's politically incorrect to just drone strike us or regime change us. That's where that was coming from.
Okay, when you say us, I mean, I'm not getting a clear idea of what you're talking about. I know that you know what you're talking about, but I'm not a mind reader.
Oh, you're not?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so I don't know what you're talking. When you say they can't drone strike us, I don't think Trump was talking about drone striking Canada.
He didn't specify, but he was talking about Canadians. He was specifically talking to the Toronto Star in regards to the trade negotiation.
Okay.
Did I not even open up? I didn't explain that. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't.
The topic here, I apologize. The topic here is the NAFTA trade negotiation. My bad. Where we had the stalled talks last Friday. We were hoping to maybe come up with an agreement to include Canada in NAFTA. And it might have actually happened on Friday, except that Trump had some off-the-record comments to a newspaper called the Toronto Star, where he said that the deal with Canada over this NAFTA is going to be completely one-sided favoring the States. And in fact, it's so bad for Canada that if Trump would publicly say what the deal is, Canada would never be able to accept it because it would be so embarrassing. And then he says, like, I can't just kill these people.
You know, I got to tell you that does not strike. I'm suspicious. First of all, it would be very. It's bad business to basically say I'm coming at you with a rotten deal, and I don't know. I would want to see some confirmation on that. This one doesn't pass the smell test. Anyway, listen, Mateus, we're running out of time. And I got a couple more calls I got to get through. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Daniel in British Columbia. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'll get straight to the point, Michael. There was something that we all missed when they were burying McCain. PepsiCo went and bought SodaStream. So there's one more company in my mind that should, have a boycott. And it's the only thing that Israel listens to is the bottom line dollar. The United Nations is completely toothless to stop these criminal terrorists from killing innocent women and children.
Let me put a pause here for a little bit because it may be that SodaStream's Israeli owners were feeling the pinch over the boycott. And if PepsiCo is taking it over and it's going to become an American company, then there's not much point in boycotting it, is there?
Well, they're going to be overseeing these factories in the occupied West Bank, and I don't know. I think SodaStream's stock went through the roof as a result. Anyway, the whole BDS movement is, you get guys like Ben Shapiro who say that boycotting Israel is anti-Semitic. Same with Laura Loomer. You don't see their YouTube channels get blocked.
Nope.
Anyways, I thought I'd just add that to the mix. It's one of those stories I think we
Yeah, I had missed that one as well. And yeah, if Pepsi is keeping those factories in the illegal settlements, then yes, we should continue to boycott.
Yeah. Well, there's Lay's potato chips is owned by PepsiCo, Tropicana orange juice, Quaker Oats, Cheetos, Aquafina water, Frito-Lay. I'll leave you with that. Anyways, good show. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take one more phone call, and that's going to be from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
SodaStream had to be bought because they're not doing too well from the boycott, so they are lucky to get sold, like whatever they're going to do with that company. I don't know anybody who has SodaStream anymore, so they were on its ropes anyway. Mike,
well,
did you hear what Nikki...
Hang on.
Oh, so, okay.
Dustin.
Okay.
This is not the first time a product like that has been tried. I remember back in the 60s, there was a company that was doing the same thing. I mean, it's a soda water bottle. You put in the little gas cartridge to make the soda water, and then you add the flavoring for the soda that you want, which is root beer or something. And for most people, it just seemed like an awful lot of work compared to simply grabbing a bottle out of the fridge and popping off the bottle cap. And so I'm not sure that SodaStream was really going to do all that well anyway. I certainly would not own one, and it's got nothing to do with where it's made. It just doesn't strike me as a product I'd care to have.
Yeah, exactly. Mike, Nikki Haley, what the heck? Russia should scare everybody to the bone, she says. I mean, do you actually think Trump told her to say that? You know what I mean? Mike, this Bob Woodward thing, yeah, this could be just, disinformation warfare because that's what it's about. All about disinformation.
Yeah.
But, Mike, can I ask you a hypothetical? What happens if Mike Pence is the one leaking this stuff? How do you get rid of him? You know what I mean? Because I don't like Mike Pence at all. I think he's a stiff establishment creepo. I just don't like the way he looks. I just don't like him. He looks like he's part of the establishment. You can't get away from that. But I mean, if he's the leaker per se, how do you stop it then?
Okay. Well, in that case, Trump would have to. Pence would have to be impeached. Trump can't fire him. He would have to be impeached. But one thing Trump could do was basically ban him from the White House and say, look, you've got a very nice vice president residence over there at the Naval Observatory. You can play with the telescopes at night, and you can still go on out on Air Force Two and do your official functions, but you're not going to be in the White House any longer. But again, I think Mike Pence wouldn't do this because he knows if he just sits still and does nothing, there's a very good chance he's going to become the president. And I don't think he would risk that by taking an overt action that could come back to haunt him somewhere down the road. And it doesn't mean that some of his associates aren't doing this kind of thing. But again, if it's taken at face value that there really is this anti-Trump resistance inside the White House, it reveals a White House that's in turmoil and dysfunctional, and Trump ought to just fire the lot of them and start all over again. If, on the other hand, my theory is right, and this is a psychological operation targeting the president and the White House staff, then that is a very, very serious development. It actually is the beginning of a coup d'etat.
Yeah, because you're sowing discontent inside the White House where people will be looking at each other. So, yeah, I'd say it might most likely will be like a disinformation warfare, but we did have in the past people leaking stuff. So, and there is a deep state, and there is anti-Trumpers per se, and there's a lot of shenanigans going on. And Mike, the Syrian army is going to be going. I mean, they're in the outskirts of Idlib, but they're going in soon. So there's going to have to be a false flag coming up in the next, I'd say, in less than 2 weeks. There's got to be. I mean, there's just too much of it coming out. Like Nikki Haley says, she knows there's one coming.
She looked in her crystal ball. You know, she got out her witch's broom and she danced around the crossroads and, you know, got her crystal ball and says she absolutely knows Assad is going to gas a bunch of children.
What happened to your fired? You're hired, like for the deep state. Yeah, that's where I don't know. Trump is flip-flop, wishy-washy. I don't know what you can call him, but, you know, everything he ran on during the campaign, everybody who calls in who still likes Trump, everything he ran on in the campaign, everything is opposite now. The economy's doing great. All of a sudden,
I don't know that it's doing
we're not
great.
in a bubble anymore, you know?
I don't think the economy...
we're not in a bubble anymore, according to him, you know?
Well, actually, it looks like we're going into a repeat of 2008. And unfortunately, you know, Trump is in a situation. He has to go on supporting the lies of the previous administrations about how great the economy is. Because if he'd gone to the White House and told the American people the truth about how bad the economy is, the Democrats would scream, "Oh my goodness, Trump has destroyed the economy. We left it in really good shape, you know, with Barack Obama here, and Trump has just utterly destroyed the economy. Bad Trump, no cookie."
And Mike, one more thing before I let you go to finish your end of the show. In America, the intelligence agencies run the country, not the president. In Russia, the president runs the country, not the intelligence agencies. Now, who would have thought? You know, everything's been flipped around, Mike. You know, that's scary.
I don't think it's that clear cut. I don't think it's that clear cut. I think what's going on here is that the U.S. government is badly factionalized and everybody is fighting for more control. The intelligence agencies, obviously Trump and his White House, the money people, the military-industrial complex, the medical-industrial complex, they're all trying to enlarge their influence and power to steer the money their way. And again, it's another symptom that we saw in the lead up to the collapse of the former Soviet Union.
Which is, you know, also a civil war. You got civil unrest with factions, and you also have civil unrest with different factions in different states in this country. So, yeah, we're in a world of hurt. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here, and a couple of stories that we have to see the show out. Sarah Sanders has tweeted out the opinion desk phone number for the New York Times for anybody, and she means anybody, who wants to call and ask about the, quote, gutless loser, end quote, behind this anonymous op-ed that claims to be part of a White House resistant. And I imagine that their phones are going to be ringing off the hook because there's a lot of people who are very angry about this. And again, I think this is a psyop against the White House and Donald Trump. I don't think it's real. I think it's more New York Times just making up stuff here, working together with Bob Woodward to just try and rattle the president, keep him angry, keep him off focus, keep him off balance, while they close in for the kill with the Mueller investigation. Interestingly enough, Bono has this non-governmental organization called One. And they're now putting out the idea that African migrants are needed in Europe because the African migrants are full of youthful energy, and they're going to be needed to replace senile, aging Europeans. So they're fully on board with this open borders, bring in the refugees thing. I have another idea. How about we replace the senile, aging Europeans with young, energetic Europeans? That's the way it's normally supposed to work. What's wrong with that? Why is that not an acceptable solution? So, little thing out there. Nike is in big trouble over this Kaepernick partnership. They went ahead and doubled down with billboards and a TV commercial today. And their favorability poll numbers have crashed 34%. Trump is out there on the warpath saying Nike is feeling the anger and starting to feel the boycotts because they're disrespecting the flag. And it shows what happens when corporations decide they're going to be political. They've lost a huge amount of their value on the stock market. Their investors are getting very, very nervous. We're seeing more and more people who are destroying their sports gear with the Nike brand and posting it to Twitter. I think they ought to just tear off the little swoosh and donate the clothing to the homeless if they want to here. And having learned nothing from the disaster that is befalling Nike, San Francisco's Levi Strauss is taking an anti-gun stance. Now, Levi Strauss makes blue jeans. They make clothes. They don't make guns. But Chip Berg, the president and CEO of Levi's, wrote an op-ed this week saying, business leaders need to take a stand on gun violence. Well, when you look at the cultural linkage between blue jeans and the Old West, I think Chip has made as bad a mistake here as Nike did. I'm certainly not going to be buying any more Levi's because I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. Corporations shouldn't be political. Corporations should be about making money for their investors and providing a good work environment for their employees, not getting on in with a liberal agenda. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Please share the fact that all these big social media companies, Google, Twitter, Facebook, are filtering what is on their websites to push the liberal agenda. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.